My name is Ashley Tolliver, and I was 36 years old the day my father told me a boat came first. I was standing in my parents' kitchen on a Tuesday night in September, leaning on a cane, asking for $3,500 to keep an infection in my left leg from eating the bone. I had a payment plan written out by hand, with interest. My father looked out the window toward the gravel and said, "We just bought a boat." My mom kept wiping the same spot on the table and said a limp would teach me responsibility. My sister was on speaker from Mansfield and she laughed, and she said I'd manage, because I always manage. Then headlights came up the driveway. My brother got out of a truck with an empty bed, handed me an envelope with $500 in it, and told me he'd sold all his tools. What none of us knew, standing in that kitchen, was that the paper had already been signed 3 months earlier. What I did about it, 9 months later, is the part I still think about at 4 in the morning. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is where we sit with the quiet betrayals that happen inside families, the ones nobody posts about, the ones that take years to surface and one afternoon to undo. If you've ever been the one holding something together while somebody else got handed the keys, stay with me, drop a comment, and be sure to subscribe. The Tolliver shop sits behind my parents' house on 11 acres off Half Moon Road in Ashland County, Ohio. My grandfather Emmett put up the first building in 1968 with a borrowed crane and a banknote he cleared in 9 years. By March of 2025, we were 11 people and about $2.3 million a year, almost all structural steel. Stairs, rails, mezzanine framing, the bones inside buildings nobody ever looks at. I ran quality control and I wrote the bids. I also welded better than anybody on that floor, which is not a thing you're supposed to say about yourself, so I'll say it once and move on. That Thursday morning, I was checking preheat on a thick joint for a stair stringer order, temp stick in my glove, when the rack behind me let go. It was a cantilever rack we'd been overloading for 6 years. I had written it up twice on the monthly safety walk. Both times, my father read the sheet, folded it in half, and said we'd get to it when things slowed down. Things never slowed down. A bundle of square tube came off the second arm and caught my left leg below the knee. I heard it before I felt it. That's the part people don't believe. There's a sound like a green branch going, and then about 2 seconds of nothing at all. And then the whole world narrows down to one white point about 8 inches long. Travis got a tourniquet on me out of the first aid box while Dale ran for the phone. My father came out of the office at a dead run, which for a man his size is a serious thing to watch. He went down on the concrete next to me and put his hand on my shoulder. And the first thing he said, with my blood already on his sleeve, was not what you would think. What he said was that I shouldn't tell the squad guys anything about the rack. I want to be fair to him, so I'll tell you, he said it the way you'd swat a wasp off a kid. Fast, not thought through. He rode with me to the hospital in Mansfield, and he held my hand in the bay, and he did not leave until 2 in the morning. It was an open fracture of the tibia. They put a rod down the middle of the bone that night, which is exactly what it sounds like, and it is a good surgery, and it usually works. Around midnight, on the good drugs, I asked him about the first report of injury. I know the form. I'd filled one out for Dale when he took a grinder to the forearm in 2019. My father said, "We'll handle this in-house. Put it on the company insurance and I'll square it up." I said the state fund covers work injuries at 100% and there's no deductible, and it's not optional. He said Monday. I made him say it twice. When I got home 4 days later, I wrote it on the wall calendar in the kitchen in pencil, on the Monday square, BWC. 2 weeks after that, I asked him again, standing in the shop office on crutches, and he handed me a claim number on the back of a receipt. I put it in my phone under claim. I want you to understand something before we go on, because people always ask. I saw it. I asked. I wrote it down. I asked again. I kept that number in my phone for 5 months, and I did not find out what it actually was until my leg started running a fever the shop couldn't fix. I was back on the floor in 8 weeks on crutches, because nobody else could read a shop drawing well enough to keep the bids honest. My father cleaned off the long bench by the layout table and set a stool there so I could sit and work. He did that himself, with a wire wheel. on a Sunday. That's the kind of thing he did. Behind that bench is the wall. If you have never been inside a fabrication shop, here is the part worth knowing. When a welder qualifies, they weld a test plate and somebody cuts coupons out of it and bends them in a jig, and if the coupon opens up a crack, you failed. If it folds over clean, you passed. And Tolliver started nailing the bent coupons to the wall behind the bench in 1968, each one with a little aluminum tag stamped with a name and a date. Emmett's are up top, black, with more than 50 years of shop air. My father's are next. Then 24 men who came and went. Then a stretch about 6 feet wide that is almost all mine. 2009, when I qualified in the vertical and overhead positions at 19. 2011, 2014, 2016. 2 from 2020, from the week I sat for my inspector exam. My father used to walk customers past that wall and he'd tap the 6 feet of it and say, "That's my daughter's." And then he'd say, the thing his father used to say, "A weld doesn't care whose daughter you are." He meant it as a compliment. I took it as one for 20 years. On the lathe across the aisle there's a brass plate with 3 names on it, from when the machine was rebuilt. All 3 of them are men. I never once thought about that until August, when my leg started running a fever the shop couldn't fix. It started as heat. Then the incision at the top of the shin started weeping, and I ran 101 for 2 days, and I went in. Dr. Ruth Halverson is a trauma orthopedist and she does not soften things, which I appreciated then, and appreciate more now. She put the images up and said the hardware was infected and the infection was in the bone, osteomyelitis. She said the plan was to open it, take out the dead bone, exchange the rod, and run 6 weeks of antibiotics straight into a vein through a line in my arm. I asked how soon. She said within 2 weeks. And then she said the sentence I still hear. She said, "If we wait past that, we'll be having a different conversation." She did not say the word amputation, and she didn't have to. The scheduler called Thursday. The surgery center wanted the balance of my deductible up front before they'd put me on the board. $3,500. I called the insurance line to fight it, and the woman was kind and completely immovable. My plan had already flagged the claim. Work-related injury, she said. It belongs to the state fund, not to us. Submit it through the Bureau. So I called the Bureau of Workers' Compensation, and I gave them my name and my social and the claim number my father wrote on the back of a receipt. The woman put me on hold for 4 minutes. When she came back, she said there was no claim under my name. Ever. Not denied. Not pending. It did not exist. The number in my phone was a steel mill order number. I had $940 in savings, my truck payment was due the 11th, and my surgery window was closing. So on a Tuesday night in September, I drove the 4 miles over to my parents' house. I did not sit down. I stood at the end of the table with my hand on the cane, and I laid it out the way I lay out a bid, because that's the only way I know how to ask for anything. The number, 3,500. The deadline, 11 days. What it was for, in plain words. The rod in my leg is infected, and the infection is in the bone. And if it isn't cut out, we stop talking about the leg working and start talking about whether I keep it. Then the plan. I'd sign a note, 6%, which is more than they'd get anywhere, payable at $400 a month starting the 1st of November, and I'd let them hold the title to my truck. My mother kept wiping the same spot on the table the whole time. My father looked past me and out the window over the sink, toward the gravel, where there was a used 21-foot bayliner sitting on a trailer with a cover on it. $18,400. He'd had a guy paint Marlene Sue across the transom in gold letters. He said, "We just bought a boat." He didn't say it cruel. He said it the way you'd say the road was closed. My mother finished the spot she'd been wiping and folded the rag and said, "A limp will teach you responsibility." Nothing else ever did. My sister Heather was on speaker from her kitchen in Mansfield, half listening the way she does, and she laughed, one short, honest laugh, and she said, "You'll manage, Ash. You always manage." And there it was, all 3 of them, inside about 90 seconds. I want to tell you I said something. I didn't. I asked my mother if I could have a glass of water. She got me one. I drank all of it standing there, and I set the glass in the sink. And I said, "Thank you for hearing me out." And I went out the side door. My father followed me as far as the step and said he'd ask around about a payment plan at the hospital. I said that would be good. I was halfway across the gravel to my truck when headlights came up the drive. It was Travis. My brother is 5 years younger than me, and he has never in his life been able to hide anything, which is a hard way to go through a family like ours. He backed in next to my truck and got out, and the bed of his pickup was empty. That morning, it had been full. He kept a small welder in there, and a drill kit, and 3 grinders, and a rolling box he'd been filling since he was 17. He handed me a bank envelope with the flap tucked in, $500 in 20s and 10s. He said, "I sold all my tools." Then he stood there with his hands in his jacket pockets like a kid outside a principal's office, and said he was sorry it wasn't more, and that he'd gotten lowballed on the grinders. I tried to give it back. I barely got started before he stepped away from me, out of reach, which is a thing you can do to a woman on a cane, and he knew it, and he did it anyway. He said he could borrow whatever he needed off the shop. He said Kaylee was fine with it, and I knew that was probably not the whole truth. Then he asked me, in this careful voice, whether the claim number Dad gave me was working out, because he'd wondered about it. That's when I understood he thought it was real, that he'd been carrying it around in his head like a fact. I told him it was being sorted. I don't know why I lied. He hugged me, badly, around the cane, and got in his truck and left. He did not know what was coming. Neither did I. But I had a machine, and I had a number to hit. And 11 days. Here is what I had that was mine: a Miller engine drive on a 16-foot tandem trailer, a full torch outfit, 400 feet of leads, a bottle rack, a chop saw, and a job box with about 9 years of Saturdays in it. I bought all of it with side work, cash, one piece at a time, starting the year I turned 27. It sat under a carport at my rental on Half Moon Road, and I ran it on weekends doing handrail and gate work for people who found me by word of mouth. That rig was the only reason I could ever have walked out of my family's shop and eaten. It was my back door. I put it on the classifieds Wednesday night with 6 photos and no story, because nobody buys a machine off a sad post. A man named Chuck Vandiver drove down from Sullivan on Friday morning. He was 60 and he walked around the trailer twice without saying anything, and he ran the machine for 11 minutes and shut it off. He offered $2,900. It was worth more, and we both knew it, and I said yes before the sentence was finished. While he was hooking up, he looked at my cane and at the fresh dressing above my sock, and he said one thing. He said, "You know what you're selling, right?" I told him I did. $2,900 plus Travis's $500, plus $100 I had in an envelope from my tax refund for new brake pads. $3,500. I paid the surgery center Friday afternoon over the phone. The soonest board slot they had was October 15th. Dr. Halverson had wanted me open 5 weeks before that. That 5 weeks is the reason I walk the way I walk now, and I have made my peace with knowing exactly who to hand the bill to. They opened me on the 15th, and it went longer than planned, and that's never a sentence you want repeated back to you in recovery. Halverson took out more dead bone than the images suggested. She swapped the rod, packed the space, closed me over a drain, and then a nurse ran a line up the vein in my right arm until the tip sat near my heart, and that line stayed in me for 6 weeks. Twice a day I hung a bag, flushed the port, and ran the antibiotic. I timed it with the same little countdown timer I use on the floor to hold interpass temperature, which struck me as funny around day 9 and stopped being funny around day 20. My dog Rooster is 13 and mostly deaf, and he lay against the recliner for 6 weeks, like it was a job he'd been assigned. My mother came twice. Both times she brought a devotional book, and both times she asked whether I'd been praying about my attitude. My father did not come, but he had Travis put $40 of gas in my truck every Friday for 3 months, without a word. Which is how that man says almost everything he's ever meant, and the whole time, I did the bids. Nobody asked me to. There was nobody else who could read a spec and price a stair tower, so I sat in that recliner with a laptop on a pillow, and I quoted work, and I chased submittals, and I released material. The shop billed $112,000 that October. Every one of those numbers came out of a recliner on Half Moon Road, and I want to be honest with you about why I did it. I thought I was making a deposit. Heather came once, in November, with a chicken and rice casserole in a foil pan and a coupon for the pan back. She's 39, and she runs the front office of a dental practice in Mansfield, and she is not a bad person, which I need you to hold on to, because what she said was worse for being kind. She sat on the arm of the couch for 22 minutes with her coat still on. She looked at the PICC line and made a face and looked away. Then she said, "You should have gotten out when I did. Dad was never going to hand that place to you." She said it gently, the way you'd tell someone their dog is old. I asked her, "Hand it to who then?" And my sister did this small shrug. Not a mean one. The kind of shrug you give when somebody asks why the county doesn't plow your road until Thursday. Then she changed the subject to her son's travel baseball and left at 6 because of traffic. I sat there after with the pan on my lap, still warm on the bottom, and I ran that shrug back about 40 times. Because a shrug is not an opinion. A shrug is a person telling you they think you already know something. Heather had been out of that shop since she was 18. She had no dog in it. So whatever she knew casually, and that meant it had been said out loud somewhere, at some table, on some evening, in a house 4 miles from mine. 3 weeks later, the general liability renewal came into my work email. I open all of those. It's my job. A certificate of insurance is a boring one-page document that says who is covered and for how much, and general contractors will not let a truck through the gate without a current one. Ours came from the agency in Worcester every year in the first week of December, and it came to me because for 8 years I was the quality and compliance contact for Tolliver Iron and Fabrication, and my email address was the one on file with every customer we had. I opened it on my laptop on a Tuesday morning with the line still in my arm. Coverage limits? Fine. Effective dates? Fine. Additional insureds? Fine. And then the named insured line. Tolliver Iron and Fabrication LLC, Travis W. Tolliver, member. Not Ward Tolliver, not Ward and Marlene Tolliver, which is how it had read every year since 2011. Travis. My first thought, and I am telling you this because it is the most embarrassing true thing in this entire story, was that the agency had made a typo. My literal first act was to start typing a correction email to a woman named Sandy so she could fix it before it went out to customers. I got 2 lines in, then I stopped, and I sat back, and I looked at that word, member, because an agency doesn't invent a member. An agency copies whatever the state has on file. Before I hit send, I opened the Ohio Secretary of State Business Search in another tab. It's free. Anybody can do it. You type in a name. The filing history came up in about 2 seconds. Articles of Organization, 2011, when Dad converted from a sole proprietorship. Then annual nothing, the way it should be. Then an amendment. Filed June 12, 2025. Membership interest transferred in full. Travis Ward Tolliver, sole member. My father's name is not on the shop he ran for 38 years, and my name is not on it either. And it was done on the 12th of June. I broke my leg on the 27th of March. I stood in that kitchen on the 9th of September, so my parents signed the entire business over to my brother while I was on crutches, and then, 3 months later, they sat at a table and listened to me explain what an infection does to bone and told me about a boat. I did not cry, and I'm not going to pretend I did something dramatic. I sat in a recliner with a laptop, and I read the filing 4 times to make sure I understood the columns. Then I got up, hopped to the printer in the spare room, and printed it. Not for evidence. There was no case. I printed it because I needed to hold it, the way you need to hold a bill after somebody tells you the amount over the phone. I sat there with a public record on my kitchen table and did the arithmetic I'd been avoiding for 8 years. If you've ever done that math, the one where you add up everything you gave and realize nobody else was keeping the same ledger, then you already know what my hands felt like. Tell me about it in the comments. And subscribe, because this gets worse before it gets clear. The next morning, I drove out to the shop and asked my father one question. The shop office smells like burnt coffee and cutting oil, and it has smelled that way since I was 12 years old. He was at the desk with the radio on low. I didn't work up to it. I said the date out loud, June 12th, and I asked him why he never told me. He didn't deny it, and he didn't ask how I found out, and both of those things told me he'd been carrying it around waiting. He turned the radio off. Then he opened the bottom drawer of the desk, the one that sticks, and took out a piece of flat bar about 4 inches long with numbers stamped into it. His hands are the size of dinner plates, and they were not steady. He said his father made that tag in 1989 when they retooled the big lathe, and he said Emmett let him stamp the last 2 numbers, and that was the only time in 22 years his father let him touch that machine while a customer was in the building. He said he waited for Emmett to hand him the shop his whole life. He said it came 3 weeks after the funeral, through a lawyer in Ashland, in a manila envelope with a form to sign. He said, "I wasn't going to make Travis wait like that." And I said, "Quiet," because we were still just 2 people in a small room. "What about me, Dad?" He put the tag back in the drawer and pushed it shut with the heel of his hand. And then he said the thing that I have turned over more times than any other sentence in my life. He said, "A shop goes to a son. That's not me, Ash. That's just how it is." He wasn't angry. He wasn't ashamed. He said it the way you'd read a gauge. And that was when I understood that he thought he was being kind to everybody, including me, and that no argument I made was going to reach a man who believed he was describing the weather. I said, "Okay." I went out onto the floor, and I stood in front of that wall for a long time. There was a stack of empty plastic milk crates by the consumables cage. I took one. Then I went back to the bench and I started taking my coupons off the wall. You have to work a nail out of oak that's been there since before you were born, and my hands were shaking, and my leg was bad. So it took a while. Each one made a flat clack when it hit the bottom of the crate, then a duller sound as they stacked. 2009, 2011, 2014, 2016, both from 2020, every bent piece of steel with an aluminum tag that had A. Tolliver stamped on it went into that crate, and nothing else did. I did not touch Emmett's. I did not touch my father's. I did not touch a single coupon belonging to a man who'd worked there for 6 months in 1994 and quit over a paycheck. I only took mine. Dale stopped his grinder. Marty came out from behind the shear. Nobody said a word to me. 3 grown men stood there and watched a woman on a cane pull nails out of a wall, and not one of them asked what I was doing, because everybody in that building already knew and had known since June. I carried the crate out to my truck and set it on the passenger seat. And driving home, I thought about my grandfather's line, the one my father tapped that wall and said for 20 years. "A weld doesn't care whose daughter you are." He always stopped there. That's where the pride is. But I was 36 years old that day, and I finally heard the rest of it. The half nobody in my family ever said out loud, which is that a weld doesn't care, and people absolutely do. That crate rode on my passenger seat for the next 3 months. It is the reason I knew exactly what was mine and exactly what wasn't. And later on, that turned out to matter more than anything else I owned. In January, they took bone from my hip and packed it into the gap in my tibia. Halverson showed me the films before and after and did me the courtesy of not dressing it up. She said the defect was bigger than it would have been in August. She said the graft should take. And it did. And it healed. And I am grateful for that every single day I go up a ladder. But the leg came back about half an inch short. She measured it twice on the table and wrote it down and told me to expect a limp for the rest of my life, and that a lift in the shoe would help my back, but wouldn't fix the gait. I bought a heel lift at the orthotics place out on Route 42 for $34. It's a piece of dense foam the color of a bandage, and it goes in my left boot, and I replace it about every 7 months. So here is the ledger on that. My mother said a limp would teach me responsibility. She was right, in the worst possible way, and the tuition was 5 weeks. I have never once said that to her. I don't want the satisfaction of it, and I don't think she'd hear it anyway. I went back to work part-time on the 2nd of February. Half days. sitting where I could. Somebody had moved the stool from my bench. It had turned up in the paint room. And my brother was sitting in the owner's chair in the office, in a clean flannel shirt, looking like a man who'd been handed a suit that fit somebody else. Travis is a good hand. I want that on the record. He fits well, he's fast with a tape, he'll work through lunch and never mention it. What he cannot do is paper. He'd come find me 8, 10, 15 times a day. What's an interpass temperature and why does the customer care? Which of these 3 procedures do I hand the guys for a 1/4-inch fillet? The general contractor wants a submittal. What's a submittal? He knew every one of those things in his hands. He'd been doing them since he was 9. He just had never had to know their names, because for 8 years the person who knew their names was standing 20 feet away. The 3rd week he shut the office door, which he never does, and sat on the edge of the desk and said he didn't ask for this. He said, Dad brought papers over on a Thursday night in June, and said sign here, and he signed. He said he didn't read them. He said Kaylee cried and he thought it was because she was happy, and it turned out it wasn't. Then he asked me if I was mad at him. And I told him the truth. Which was no. That was the worst part. And it took me a while to work out why. Because as long as I was angry at Travis, he was still my brother and we were still on the same side of something. The minute I wasn't, he was just the man on the other side of that desk. Then he asked me, very quietly, if there was a way to give it back. There wasn't. And at the end of February, Kestrel called about the biggest job we had ever bid. Kestrel Construction is a general contractor out of Columbus, and they were putting up a distribution center off Interstate 71 near Mansfield, 400,000 square feet. Our scope was the stairs, the rails, and the mezzanine framing. $840,000. For a shop our size that isn't a job, that's a year. I wrote that bid myself in November from a recliner with a line in my arm. And I'll tell you why we won it. Because it matters for everything that comes after. The specification on that project required shop inspection of the welding by a certified welding inspector. Most shops our size don't have one on staff. They hire a third party by the hour, plus travel, plus the schedule risk of waiting on somebody else's calendar, and that cost goes into the number. We didn't have to. We had one in the building, salaried at $58,000 a year, who also happened to be the person writing the bid. That's the whole margin. That's how a shop with 11 people beats 2 shops with 30. My father signed the contract on a Tuesday. My brother signed the contract on a Tuesday, since his was the name that mattered now. Everybody shook hands in the office and my mother brought in a sheet cake from the IGA. Not one person in that room asked me whether I was planning to stay. It genuinely did not occur to them to ask. And I want you to sit with that, because it is the entire story in one sentence. That afternoon I pulled a file I hadn't touched in 3 years. I still don't know what made me open it. It was the 2023 stringer job. A run of stair stringers and landing connections for a fitness building, a school addition, and a church. All 3 off the same procedure. I don't know what put it in my head. Something about the thick joint on the Kestrel drawings rhymed with it. The way a smell gets you. I pulled the folder out of the cabinet and opened it on the layout table and read my own writing on the procedure I wrote for that job. Preheat, minimum, at the heavy end of that connection. And I looked at the number and my stomach did a small thing that I ignored. Preheat is not a formality. You warm the steel before you strike an arc so the heat doesn't run out of the weld too fast, because if it cools too fast on thick material, you can get cracking that doesn't show up for days. Days. The code gives you a table. Thickness on one side, minimum temperature on the other. It is not a judgment call. I was going to go get the book and check the table. I was actually walking toward the shelf. Then the phone rang in the office and Travis started saying my name in the voice he uses when a customer has him cornered, and I turned around and I closed the folder. And I put it back in the drawer, and I went and answered the phone. That night, I printed my own inspector's copy of it, the way I have done with every document I have ever signed my number to, and I set it on top of the file cabinet in the spare room at my house. That folder sat on top of that cabinet from the end of February until the middle of June. I need you to remember that, because of what it cost me later. In the first 2 weeks of March, we lost our 2 best hands. Marty took a job with a bridge outfit in Cleveland for $9 more an hour, and Dale turned 66 and went to Florida to be near his grandkids. That left us thin on the flux cord work right as the Kestrel material started landing. On a Wednesday in the middle of March, my father came into the QC room with a blank welder qualification form and set it on the desk in front of me. He wanted Travis on the record as qualified for the vertical position with that process. He said it plain, sign it. I said Travis has to test. He said, "You've watched that boy weld since he was 9 years old. You know he can do it." And he was right, more or less. Travis can weld. That was never the question. The question was that my signature on that form means one thing and one thing only, which is that I personally watched a test, and the coupons were bent, and they passed. It doesn't mean I have an opinion. It means I was there. I told him that, calmly, twice, and the second time I said the other half of his father's line out loud for the first time in my life. I said, "A weld doesn't care whose son he is either." He looked at me for a long second. Then he picked the form up off the desk, tapped it square on the edge like a man tidying a deck of cards, and walked out. He didn't argue. He didn't slam anything. 3 months later, I would understand why, and I have wondered ever since why that didn't frighten me more at the time. They still did Sunday dinner. I still went, which surprises people, but 4 miles is 4 miles, and I wasn't ready to be a person who didn't go. That Sunday in the middle of March, the room had a temperature to it before the plates came out. Heather said I was making things hard on everybody down there. My mother said the shop had fed all of us and everyone has to give something up for it, and then she asked me to pass the corn. Travis didn't eat. My father talked about a bearing on the ironworker like nothing else existed. Nobody said the word signature. Nobody said the word June. They had a way of talking around a thing that was so practiced it was almost beautiful, like watching a guy TIG a bead without looking at his hands, and through the window over the sink, out on the gravel, sat the boat. Cover on. Tires, flat-spotted. And I did the arithmetic while my sister talked about a dentist retiring. Bought in June, and it was March. 9 months. There is a lake 20 minutes from that house. In 11 months, that boat had not been in the water one time, not once. It wasn't for the water. I've thought about that a lot since. I don't fully understand it even now. But it wasn't for the water. I helped my mother carry plates to the sink because that's what I do. And I said goodnight to everybody, and I drove the 4 miles home, and I sat down at my kitchen table and typed 2 pages. That Monday morning, the 16th of March, I handed my brother a resignation letter with 30 days' notice because he was the owner, and that's who you hand it to. Then I handed my father the 2 pages. Page 1 was every welding procedure the shop was running that would have to be requalified, and why, and what it would cost, with the 2 vendor numbers I had already gotten. Page 2 was every welder qualification currently in force, whose it was, which process it covered, and the date it would lapse under the continuity rule if that man didn't run that process at least once every 6 months. That rule is not mine. It's in the code. A welder is qualified until he goes 6 months without using the process, and then he isn't, and it does not matter one bit how good he is. Page 2 also listed the clause in the Kestrel contract requiring shop inspection by a certified welding inspector, the date of the insurance audit, and 1 line at the bottom stating that all company procedures and qualification records were being left in place, printed and bound in file cabinet 2. I read page 1 out loud to him. He stood there with his arms folded and let me finish. Then he took both pages, folded them in half, and put them in the pocket of his shirt without looking down. He said, "We'll be fine. My dad ran this place with a pencil." That's the whole conversation. 30 days later, I clocked out for the last time and walked to my truck carrying a plastic milk crate of bent steel and a plastic card with my name and an inspector number on it. That was all. Everything else in that building belonged to Tolliver Iron and Fabrication, and I left every bit of it, squared up, labeled, and in order. People hear this part and expect there to be more. There isn't. That was enough. The day after my last shift, I wrote 2 more letters, and these are the ones people get wrong when I tell this story, so I'm going to be careful. One went to Dean Whitaker, the quality manager at Kestrel. One went to the certification body. Both said the same 4 things. As of this date, I am no longer employed by Tolliver Iron and Fabrication. As of this date, I am no longer their quality representative. Any inspection record dated after this carries no signature of mine. Please update your file. No complaint. No accusation. Not one sentence about my father or my brother or a boat. I did not call OSHA. I did not call a customer. I did not take one of their procedures or one of their qualification records out of that building. What I did was the paperwork a person in my position is required to do, and the only way to get it wrong would have been to stay quiet and let my name sit on a file I wasn't standing behind anymore. Lorraine Pike, who tutored me through the inspector exam back in 2020 and has 40 years in, read them both over coffee and handed them back. She said, "Do they understand what you just took off the table?" I said, "They think I took a coffee cup." Kestrel wrote back in 11 minutes. 11. Dean Whitaker acknowledged receipt and asked, politely, who Tolliver's replacement inspector would be, and copied my father and my brother on it. People asked me if that felt good. It didn't. It felt like shutting the lights off in a building I helped put up. If you've ever had to do the correct thing while everyone around you called it revenge, you know the difference. Tell me about yours below, and subscribe, because you'll want to see how this lands. There is one more thing I did on that same Monday in March, and I want to tell it straight. I filed a first report of injury with the Ohio Bureau of Workers' Compensation for an accident that happened on the 27th of March, 2025. In Ohio, you get 1 year. I filed with 11 days left. I want to be very clear that I did not sneak. You can file it yourself online in about 20 minutes, and the fact that an employer never filed it does not close the door on you. And if you take nothing else from this story, take that. I put the date of the accident, the rack, the 2 safety walk write-ups, the hospital in Mansfield, the rod, the infection, the second surgery, and the surgery center payment. Then I printed a copy and drove it to the shop and put it in Travis's hand, because he was the owner and he had a right to know before the mail told him. He read the first page standing in the parking lot in the rain. He looked up and asked, in a small voice, if he was going to be in trouble. I said, "Probably some." I said I was sorry. And then I said I was filing it anyway, and I got in my truck. It was the first time in my life I ever asked for something for myself without asking permission first, and I was 36 years old, and my hands shook the whole way home. That claim sat quiet for just under 3 months. Then it met an inspector coming the other way. I rented a bay in the industrial park on the north side of Ashland for $900 a month, 2,400 square feet, 1 overhead door, 3-phase power, and a roof that leaked over the corner I put the desk in. I had no rig. I'd sold it. I financed a welder, borrowed a plasma cutter off Lorraine, bought a used bandsaw at an auction in Worcester for $600, and registered a name, Half Moon Fabrication. The first month I fixed a fire escape, built a bakery rack, and rebuilt a plow blade. In May, I picked up the first real one, handrail, guardrail, and 2 stair runs for the Perrysville School Edition. $61,000, 8 months of revenue in a single contract, and I signed it at that leaky desk with a space heater running in May because the slab was still cold. Meanwhile, 4 miles the other direction, I heard things. Not from family, from suppliers, from a guy at the gas station, from Lorraine. Tolliver had called 2 third-party inspection outfits. The first quoted hourly plus mileage and had a 6-week backlog. The second said they would not sign anything until every welder in the building retested, because no inspector alive puts his number on records somebody else kept. My father called them both a bunch of highway robbers. And then he told Travis to keep running the Kestrel work, because the schedule was the schedule, and they'd square the paper up after. On the 9th of June, at about 10 in the morning, a mezzanine landing at that job let go. They were setting the second-level landing with a boom lift. The connection at the beam let go while 2 men were on it. One of them caught the handrail post going down. The other was Ruben Ortiz, 34, an ironworker with the erection contractor, and he fell about 12 feet onto a bare slab and broke his pelvis in 3 places. He has a wife named Nadia and 2 kids, 7 and 4. He was in the hospital in Columbus for 9 days and had 2 surgeries and did not work again for 9 months. He lived, and I have thanked whatever there is to thank for that more times than I can count. I heard about it at 4 in the afternoon from Lorraine, who heard it from a man she inspects for. Nobody in my family called me, not that day, and not the next. And I need to tell you the honest thing about what I felt in my truck in that parking lot, because if I clean it up, you won't believe the rest. I did not feel vindicated. I did not feel anything like right. I sat there for 20 minutes with the engine off trying to remember exactly what I had put on page 2. Which qualification? Which date? Whether I had written the lapse date for the vertical flux cord process or only listed the process. I could not remember, and it was making me sick, because somewhere in a shirt pocket or a drawer or a truck door was a piece of paper I wrote, and a man had just fallen 12 feet. 4 days later, a man I had met exactly twice called my cell phone. Dean Whitaker is 47 and talks like a man reading a checklist to himself. He said OSHA had been on site since Wednesday. He said the surety was asking questions, the carrier was asking questions, and the owner's engineer had ordered every Tolliver connection on that building opened up and looked at. Then he got to it. Kestrel needed a certified inspector to review and close out the weld records for the entire package, and the last set of inspection records in that file that carried an actual signature carried mine. Everything after the middle of April had a blank in that box. He was not accusing me of anything, and he said so twice, which is more than most men would bother with. He asked whether I would make my records available and answer questions. I said yes, before he finished asking. Then he was quiet for a second and said something I've kept. He said, "Miss Tolliver, you're the only person in this file who wrote down what was going to happen before it happened." I asked if he'd seen the 2 pages. He said no. He'd seen my resignation letter to him and the notice about my inspection authority, and the dates on those had already told him most of it. I hung up and stood in my leaky bay with my hand on the desk. 2 hours later, my father's truck came up my driveway on Half Moon Road for the first time in 5 years. He didn't come inside. He stood on the gravel by the tailgate with his cap in his hand, and he had gotten old in 5 months in a way that men his size do all at once. My mother sat in the passenger seat of the truck with the window up. Travis stood by the back door, and he wouldn't look at me. My father said the welds were fine. He said Travis has better hands than any man he ever hired. He said the problem was paper, only paper, and that a piece of paper never held a beam up in its life. What he wanted was 2 signatures, one saying Travis's qualification for that process was current on the day he ran those joints, one on a continuity log, filled in backward for the months nobody had kept it. He said, "It's just paper, Ash. The welds are the welds." Then he did the thing I had not prepared for. He said if I signed, he'd have the lawyer in Ashland move the whole company into my name in the morning. The shop, the building, the 11 acres if I wanted it. He said it fast, like a man laying a card down he'd been holding too long, and his voice broke on the word morning. 20 years. Everything I had ever wanted out of that family, standing in my own driveway in a work shirt, offering it to me. And from inside the truck, my mother rolled the window down about 4 inches and said, "A limp taught you responsibility. Use it." Travis said, "Don't, Ash." "Just that," said to the ground. I told my father I would give him an answer in the morning. He said that was fair. He put his cap back on and they left, and I stood there until the dust settled on the gravel. Then I went inside and took a file folder down off the top of a cabinet. I only meant to check Travis, pull the dates, confirm the lapse, be sure before I told my father no. But I have never in my life been able to start a review in the middle, so I started at the beginning, in 2023, and I got the codebook down off the shelf. Here's what I found. The procedure I wrote for that stringer job called for a minimum preheat at the heavy end of the connection. The material there was 1 3/4 inches thick. The table in the code says what the minimum is for that thickness and that steel, and my number was under it. Not by a hair. under it. I wrote that procedure. I approved that procedure. My signature is on the bottom of it in blue ink, and it went out to the floor, and men ran it exactly the way I told them to, because that is what a procedure is for. 3 buildings got those stringers and landings: a fitness center in Worcester, a church outside Loudonville, and a school addition in Perrysville, which is the same building where Half Moon Fabrication had a $61,000 contract for handrail, and which is the reason I know what my own signature is worth, because I sat at my kitchen table at 1 in the morning and did the arithmetic on what saying it out loud would cost me. 8 months of revenue. My first real customer. My name on a non-conformance report that every general contractor in 3 counties can pull up. And underneath all of it, a thing I had been wrong about since I was 16 years old, which was that I was building a claim on something. I wasn't. I never was. There was no ledger, and there never had been. What I had actually been building for 20 years was the only thing in that entire story that nobody could sign over to anybody, and it was worth exactly as much as I was willing to tell the truth about it. I typed until 4 in the morning. Then I printed 2 copies and drove to Mansfield. The Kestrel job office is a white construction trailer on blocks at the north end of the lot, off Interstate 71, and at 7 in the morning the generator outside the door was already running and the window unit was dripping onto the step. Dean Whitaker had coffee from the night before. I gave him a non-conformance report, 11 pages, written and signed by me, with my inspector number under my name. Page 1, Item 1, was not my brother. Page 1, Item 1 was a preheat deficiency in a welding procedure specification written and approved by Ashley Tolliver in March of 2023, the affected material thickness, the code minimum, the number I had actually called for, the 3 buildings that received product made to it, and a recommendation for ultrasonic examination of every connection in that lot, including on a building where I currently held a contract. Page 4 was the 2026 material. The lapse date of the vertical flux cord qualification. The dates the landing connections were welded, which fell after it. The recommendation to cut out and replace every one of those connections. Whitaker read page 1. Then he read it again. He put the report flat on the table and looked up at me and asked if I understood what Item 1 was going to do to my own company. I said I did. He asked why I hadn't just put it in an appendix. I said because it isn't an appendix. And that was it. That was the whole moment. There was no crowd. Just a generator running and a window unit dripping and a man in a hard hat reading. My father came in about 9 minutes later. Travis had told him where I went, and I'll never be sure if that was a betrayal or a favor. He picked the report up off the table and got 2 pages in, and then he lost it. In a tin box 8 feet wide, in front of a general contractor's quality manager. He said I had just killed my mother's house. He said his father's name went on that building in 1968. He said I could have fixed all of it with a pen. And then he pulled the 2 pages I gave him in June out of his shirt pocket, still folded in half, and shook them at me. 3 months in that pocket. Still folded. He had never once opened them. I did not raise my voice. I said, "You never read it." I said, "Ruben Ortiz has 2 kids. And I said, "A weld doesn't care whose daughter I am. You told me that." My father was the one who turned around and walked out. 10 days later, the Perrysville School Board suspended my contract pending the ultrasonic results. That is not a criticism of them. It's exactly what I would have done, and it is exactly what I recommended in writing. I had already ordered material. I gave back the deposit, ate the restocking, sold the used bandsaw I'd bought in Worcester, and went back to fixing fire escapes. 6 weeks later, the results came in on all 3 buildings. 2 connections at the church needed repair. Everything else passed. Nobody was ever in danger in Perrysville, and I could have gone the rest of my life without knowing that and slept fine, right up until I couldn't. The contract came back in October, at a lower number, because 8 months had moved. My name is on a non-conformance report that anyone in the industry can pull, and it will be there as long as those buildings stand. Here's the part I didn't expect. 2 general contractors called me that fall because of it. One was a company in Worcester I'd never bid to. The other was Dean Whitaker. Here is what happened to the shop, And I'm going to give it to you flat, because there is nothing in this list I enjoy. OSHA cited Tolliver Iron and Fabrication for permitting welding on code work by a welder without current qualification and for injury record-keeping violations, with proposed penalties around $74,000, later negotiated down. The workers' comp audit that came off my claim turned up an injury from March of 2025 that had medical bills attached and no report on file, which is its own violation, and the shop's premium rating went into a hole it was never going to climb out of. My claim was allowed. They paid my surgery center money back, all $3,500 of it, in a check that arrived on a Tuesday and sat on my counter for 2 days because I couldn't decide how to feel about it. The surety pulled the bonding line, and a fabricator without a bond can't bid anything big, and big was all they had left. Kestrel terminated for cause, held the unpaid balance, and back-charged the cost of cutting out and replacing the mezzanine connections. The shop closed the second week of September. 11 people lost their jobs, including a 19-year-old named Cody, who had been there 4 months and had done absolutely nothing to anybody. I am not going to sit here and tell you that part was fine. My father sold the building and the equipment to an overhead door company out of Worcester. The Bayliner sold in July. It had never been in the water, not one time. Ruben Ortiz's claim got filed correctly, which it might not have been, and he was back on light duty by spring. Travis works at a truck body shop out on Route 250 now, hourly, and this past spring he tested for the vertical position at a third-party center in Columbus with an inspector he'd never met, and he passed on the first plate. He sent me a picture of the card. Nobody has apologized. My mother has never once mentioned my leg. My father has not called. And customers still ring my shop phone and say, "Yeah, can I talk to the welder?" And I still say, "Speaking," 2 or 3 times a week, and I expect I will be saying it when I'm 60. That part didn't change, and I don't think it's going to. What changed is smaller than that, and it's mine. Half Moon Fabrication is 2 people now, and the welder is paid off. And we did 7 code jobs in 2026. 6 of them came from men who had read that non-conformance report with my name on page 1. On Saturdays, my niece Ren sweeps my shop for $10 and a pop. She's 11, she's Travis's, and she has her grandfather's hands, which I have decided not to say out loud to anybody. Last Saturday, she stopped in front of the wall behind the bench, where I've nailed up the coupons out of that milk crate, plus 1 new tag from this year. She asked when she gets to take the test. I didn't make her a promise. I handed her a piece of scrap and a hammer, and I told her what a coupon has to do when you bend it, that it has to fold over and stay shut, and that if it opens up, you failed, and it doesn't matter one bit whose kid you are. I spent 20 years building what I thought was a claim on something, and it turned out I'd been building the only thing nobody can sign away. And the day I put my own name on the worst mistake I ever made was the day I stopped needing anyone in that family to hand me anything at all. That's my story. A rack nobody replaced, a form nobody filed, a boat that never touched water. If you got hurt at work and somebody told you they'd handle it in-house, go look up your claim number this week. Don't take their word for it. And if you know a woman who's been holding something together for people who never wrote her name down anywhere, send this to her. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.